Welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can build ChatGPT powered Bubble apps that pull in external data sources from other APIs. So this is a lot like adding custom ChatGPT plugins to your Bubble apps. So just as a demo, we're going to build something that does this kind of thing here. So this app, which I'll walk through how to build this in a minute. What this does is it goes out to a finance API and it pulls in the information, and then we ask it here to summarize it. So we can see here that it's telling us about these companies, Petrobras maybe, Amazon and Chevron, and sort of what's happening in the news today. And so this is being pulled from a financial trending news API, which I'll show you in a second. And it's pulling down a whole bunch of data, and then it's quickly reading through it and summarizing it for us. So in order to do this, we're going to use a plugin that I built. So full disclaimer, it's a Bubble plugin that allows you to get this streaming effect as well as generate these function calls. So this is from this new update, relatively new, it's about a month old now, that OpenAI released function calling for ChatGPT. And on top of function calling, so we're going to use that to generate a function signature. And then on top of that, the plugin will execute the function call against the API here that we've set up. So what this is going to look like is we're going to set up a new page, and we're going to add a data container. We're going to add a couple of visual elements to control the app, and then we're going to see how we can pull the data in. So before we go through this, actually, I'll show you one more thing here. If I turn on this little switch here, we can see what's inside the data container. So we can see here is a function definition that we've set up. So we're going to do this as one of our steps. We're going to say basically for certain queries or certain prompts rather, if this seems like a good function to generate a signature for based on whatever's typed in here, then ChatGPT can decide to generate a function call, which is basically filling in this function signature. In this case, we don't actually need any properties or parameters, so it's sort of just replicating the same thing here. And then in here, we actually have all the data from the API. So the different news stories and their URLs. And you can see if we scroll down, so this all came back in the API response. You can see it's an enormous amount of information. And reading through all these articles would take quite a while. And so I'm just going to hide this again down here. So the basic idea is you can pull in large amounts of data and very quickly get insights into them or analysis over top of them or something. So this is what the app looks like. So now let's look at how to build it. So just know this page is defined in the ChatGPT demo app, the URL. Here's the sort of working URL to access the run mode, but the editor here is publicly readable. So this is just, if you've used this plugin before, open this up in a separate tab. If you've used the ChatGPT with real-time streaming plugin before, this is the demo page for that demo app, I guess, really for the plugin that explains how to set it up and stuff. So this is the index page, which you may or may not have seen before. But yeah, I'm going to leave this function calling demo page up so that you can reference the workflows and the setup in here if you want to replicate this for your own apps. So here we have an input box. This is where the user would type. Here we have a button to trigger a workflow. And this is just text, and then this is dynamic text that is displaying the current message from the data container. And then everything on the right here that we saw, I'll close these now, is this data container internals data. So this is just to show you what's going on under the hood. You don't have to you probably don't want to display this on the page, but just for demo's sake. And then we just have some layout stuff here. So there are, I'll bring up this outline again. There are two basic steps. The first one is to send over the user message. So when the user clicks this Get News button, it'll send a message to ChatGPT. And then the second thing is if ChatGPT responds with a function call, that it's generated a function call, then our second workflow will be to call this action called execute function call. So this will basically go out to the API that we've defined in our function and bring the data back and send it back to ChatGPT to do whatever with it. So and look at this in some more detail. If we bring up the workflow for this, for Get News, we've got the Get News button triggers this ChatGPT send message with server action. So this is the main action in the plugin that allows you to communicate with ChatGPT. And so we just want to fill in the details. So we're using GPT-4 for the container ID, connection info, and message history. They're just the data containers corresponding property. So it's ID, it's connection info, and it's message history. Then the content will be this input box's value. So whatever the user types in, it'll be a type user. Most of this you can leave empty or leave it alone. You can add additional messages if you want. You could set a system message, for example, to say like you are a helpful financial advisor or something like that. But it's not always necessary. It sort of depends on your use case whether you have to do that. Force start is to either, if you're already running a message, this will force it to stop. By default, it's no. You can set the system message here as well. This is the same thing as setting a system message and typing it here. I just separated it out in case you want to have additional user messages up here. And then the functions are the over here. That's this piece here. I'll show you how to set that in just a minute. And all these additional properties for the API, like temperature and stop sequences, you can leave those alone for now. You want to put your API key in here. So if you're new to this and you don't have an OpenAI API key, you can come to this page, platform.openai.com/account/API keys. Just click create new secret key, and then create it, and then you'll have a key here. You can copy it, and we could paste it over in this workflow. I'll delete these keys later, of course. And then this custom URL is if you're hosting your own server. So most people watching this won't be hosting their own ChatGPT plugin. So this plugin, you can host your own server to run the plugin. So if you're doing that, then you'll put the URL here. Okay, so that's the first major action. And the second major action is to trigger the function call, which is this workflow here. But before I go through this, I want to point out that in order to get these functions defined, to tell ChatGPT that it has functions available, basically, we have two different options. We can either, we could do it in this way with set functions, or we can do it with add function. So with add function, we have this sort of menu, the workflow menu, and we define it in here. Whereas with set functions, we paste in a block of text that can have however many functions we want. So this is helpful if you, for example, let's say you have 10 functions that you want to load every time the page loads and give those to ChatGPT. Then this set functions is great for that because you just need the one workflow. You could save it to your database as a string and then reload it on page load. So that's kind of the idea there, is just to move it in and out of the container easily. Whereas this one, you could do the same thing. You could have 10 workflows that add the functions. But this is also helpful if you have, for example, if you want to let a user add a function, or if you want to define a function with dynamic values or something, you can use this add function. So we have this disabled, but it works the same way. What I'll do actually is, maybe that's not necessary. I was going to say if you load up the page, let's say you ran this add function, and you set the name to get trending financial news and the description of this. When the page loads, you'll get this text here. You could just copy this text and bring it over to the set functions tab, or sorry, the set functions action, like paste it in here, and you'll see it's exactly the same thing. You can't really tell, but I pressed Control V there to overwrite it, and it's the same text. So yeah, in a little bit more detail, you need to define a name and a description for your function, and this is what ChatGPT will use to figure out whether to call the function or not based on the prompt that the user entered. So for example, in our prompt, we say summarize the most interesting trending financial news. And in our name, pardon me, we have get trending financial news. That's the name of the function. And then in the description, this function grabs the most recent financial news from the Alpha Vantage API. You don't necessarily need to have this in here. Like ChatGPT doesn't need to know that. But you could say whatever in here that might be helpful for the model to determine whether to call it. So you could say something like, call this when user asks about financial news, something like that. That would be fine. So description is where you want to sort of prompt or sort of hint to ChatGPT what to do. And then you've got 5 property slots here. So there's name, type, description, and required for each property. So property 1 through 5 has these 4 fields. And the documentation here will sort of tell you what each thing does. Of course, the name of the property, type of the property, description is the same idea as the description for the function. So it's a clue to ChatGPT about what the property is doing. And then required yes or no is based on whether this property has to be included in the function call or not. Now these are mostly used with post requests. So if we're going to be using a get request here, which I'll explain in a second, but if you're generating a post request that has a body, and maybe you're including filters like results must be greater than this and less than this, then maybe your first property is greater than and your second property is less than. Maybe they're type of integer or whatever. So all these property, all the sort of details, the parameters of this is detailed in the OpenAI documentation, which is linked somewhere in here. Maybe it's over here in the set functions documentation. Yeah. So in this link here, the create functions documentation and in the API reference, that will give you a clue that'll explain what you need to put in the structure for these different parameters. I will do a follow-up video that uses these properties in a few days or maybe in a week. But the point for this video is just to show you sort of the basic setup with a simpler API. So we're going to leave these empty for now. So that's how we get our functions into the container. And then the only other thing to mention here is in our first message, when we click the button to get news, there's a parameter down here called function call, and we can expand the documentation here. This is a little bit confusing, the naming here. This is what it's called in the OpenAI API, but this isn't the function that you want to call, or it's not defining a function. What it is telling you whether or not to use functions, or if you do want to use a function, specifying which one to use. So that's detailed in here. But basically, if you say none, if you type none in here, ChatGPT won't use any functions. It won't generate any function calls. If you type auto, then it will, if there are functions present in the container, then ChatGPT will decide whether or not to use a function in its return message. And if you type the name of a function like this, if you want to specify the name of the function, then we could say get trending financial news in here, like this, and then ChatGPT will be forced to use that function call. So if you leave it blank, it will either do none or auto based on whether there are functions present. But if you want to be explicit, you can set that here, but we can just leave it empty for now. Okay, so that's the first part of the setup, getting the message over to ChatGPT, the initial message, which is this workflow here. I guess this should come down a step, be down here. So we will go over to RapidAPI now and look at how to find an API that we want to use and to set it up. There's not very much we have to do. So if you've never used RapidAPI before, this is a site that allows you to search thousands of different APIs that you can plug into your apps. It's really, really handy. And so Seeking Alpha is the one that we're going to use. So you could type whatever. You could type finance or sports, and you can look through and find APIs that are relevant to your app. Maybe you're doing crypto or gaming or something. But what we're going to do is I'll just type in Seeking Alpha. We can find it here. It's the same page we're going to get to here, but just to show you what it looks like. So we click, we can see here, query for news, market moving, price quotes, et cetera, et cetera. If we click on this, it'll bring us to like a sandbox where we can play with it. And so we've got our endpoints is where we are by default. And over here are the endpoints that we can use in the API. And then there's some other stuff in here. So like how much it costs to use this. Here are the different plans. You have to subscribe. Most APIs on here will have a free plan that have some limit. So for example, you can use 500 calls per month for free or 5 requests per second on the basic plan, which is what I'm currently subscribed to, as you can see. So that's totally fine for development. And then you've got, maybe there are discussions if the API is used a lot, and this is great for support and stuff. Then tutorials about endpoints. So we're just going to focus on endpoints now, though. You want to find an endpoint where the description sort of matches what you're looking to do. So here, there's a news there's a set of news endpoints. And if we click on this one, list trending, this is the one that we're using. You can see here it just says list trending news. Okay, so that's kind of what we want. And we can see in here, excuse me, we can see in here how to implement it in code, which we don't have to do any of this, but you can see here's our headers, which we will need. And it would just tell you what the URL is and the method that you need to use. So this is great. This is all the detail that we need actually in this little block here. You could also, I mostly do API development in Python. So if you're more familiar with like the requests library, you can see what it would look like by changing the language here. And then you can see what a response would look like before you issue a request. And you can see you've got, you can see there's different keys here, which is like the data that's coming back, and then it has attributes for each element. So here's the title of an article that would have come back, and so forth. And so this is all this data here is the stuff that we had in this function call response. So here's the data, and then the ID, the type, the news, and all that. That's all this stuff here. So we have data, and then type, attributes, excuse me, and so on and so forth. So this will tell you kind of what the data structure is going to be that's going to come back. That's useful to take a look at. So what we're going to do basically is take this URL and these headers, and we're going to put it, oh, we also need, I should explain, I guess, these are your, this is the sort of the endpoint internally to RapidAPI for this API, so seeking alpha. And then this here is your API key. And you can generate API keys through the developer dashboard here. So I can bring this up. When you sign up for an RapidAPI account, you get a default application and a default API key, but and usually that's fine. But if you want to add a new application, you can do that here, or in your app, you can add new API keys like this. You can say add authorization, and we could say demo key. So I'll just do this, and we'll take this key, see it here. We'll copy that. Well, we don't need it right now, but I'll show you in a minute where we would use it. So the first thing we want to do before we wire this up into our app is set up a trigger in Bubble that says if ChatGPT generates a function call, so if it decides to use one of its functions in its response, then we'll set up an event that says if it's this particular function, then we're going to call this RapidAPI API. So that's how we tell it to use this external data source. As we say, when ChatGPT decides to use this function, then we're going to call this API. The way we do that is in the workflow menu. There's event triggers here. So page is loaded, or when a button is clicked, or whatever are the standard ones. Under elements, we have from the plugin this one here. So a ChatGPT data container function call was generated. So that means we got back a function call. We click on that, and then we say the action that we want to run is execute function call. That's this here. So to fill this out, we're going to use some data from RapidAPI and some data from the plugin. So the function call that we want to use is the one that was just generated here. It'll be this. So you could take this and paste it in here. You could say specifically, if you knew exactly how you wanted to call your API. So for example, if your function call took arguments, so those properties we were looking at, then and you knew what they were going to be, you could put them in here manually. The problem is if you, or rather another way to say this is one of the strengths of function calling with ChatGPT is it will generate the appropriate function signature for you. So you don't have to specify the arguments in advance. For example, let's say we're using a weather API and you say, I want to know the weather in San Antonio. And one of the arguments is location or city. And instead of having to code in Bubble that it should be San Antonio in here, you would let ChatGPT generate the function signature for you. And then the way that we would plug it in is we would say the data container's latest function call. And this will grab whatever the most recent function call coming back from ChatGPT was. And because we are triggering this when the function call was just generated, we know that the latest one will be the one that's appropriate to what we're doing. So I'll say one other thing before we go back into that, which is, I think we've got the filled out one. No, this is the filled out one. So I'll disable this. We have here a conditional that says if the data container's latest function call name is get trending financial news. So we have latest function call, and then we have latest function call name as two different properties. And then latest function call response is the that data that we looked at, that big block of data from the API. But the function call is the whole signature that you can use to send off to the API. And then the function call name is just the name. Specifically, it's for this here so that you can specify triggers for each different function that when it comes up, you do a specific thing. So that's why that's there. So back into the execute function call, we want to call the most recent function call. We'll use GPT-4 for our model. And then here, same thing as in send message, the data container ID, connection info, and message history are just the data container's corresponding properties. So we'll say connection info, and then message history here. And then the custom OpenAI API key, again, it's the same as send message. You can put your API key in here, like this, or in your plugins tab, you can put it in here. And this will also work. So these API keys can be defined at the plugin level, and then it will be used everywhere. Or you can, for example, if you want your users to provide their own API key, then you would have an input or maybe a database entry, and you would pull it from that input or database entry. For now, I'm going to delete these because these are expired keys anyway, or rotated keys, so they won't work. But this will take precedence over what's defined at the plugin in the plugin tab. So okay, so that's all the plugin setup, and now we have a couple of things to pull over from RapidAPI. So the first thing is the URL, second is the headers, and then the third is the HTTP method. So right here we have our URL, so we'll copy this. You can see here, this is autocomplete. This is actually the wrong endpoint. I think this is, yeah, this is list trending. So this is the other just example. So here's the URL. List trending is the one we want, and we will put that in here. And then the headers we can copy directly from the header section. So these two here, you want to have these in curly braces like this. So copy the whole thing and whoops, paste them in here. For start can be yes or no, as I mentioned before. Again, the self-hosted plugin URL is if you're hosting your own server, but we don't need to do that here. And then the HTTP method, we can see request.get. So if you're in requests, the method there. If you're in the default JavaScript, I think they use fetch by default here. The method is right there in get. So we'll change our method to get. Okay, and then just one more example before we wrap up. I'll show you sort of another way that you can come at this. So if we open up this send message with server, again, what I'm going to do is add a system message and a couple of different sample prompts into the app so we can see some variants of what you can sort of prompt the model to do. The first thing I'm going to do is change GPT-4 to 3.5 Turbo -16K. The reason for this is in part to show you that you can get good responses from 3.5 still, and the 16,000 tokens allows you to get a bigger window, which is great. So if you have large API responses like the one that we're looking at, you can sort of condense more information into a single response. So that's one thing. And I'll make sure this one is using the same model. So we'll do 3.5 Turbo here. Whoops, 16K. Although for this one, actually, this is the only one that matters. This one over here for send message doesn't really, because we're just sending the first request. So this could be GPT-4. And in fact, maybe for this one, I'll keep it at GPT-4 as it's, I'm not sure if this is true. Maybe you can leave a comment down below if you know this, whether GPT-4 or 3.5, whether there's a difference in how likely they are to generate a function signature. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll leave this one as 4 for now. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll set a system message. So I added a couple more prompts down here and a sample financial analyst prompt, sort of to set the system behavior. So here we'll say you're a helpful financial analyst. To answer questions, you sometimes use data provided by API calls. If you have any messages in your history, pertaining to a query, use it to answer that question. So this is just to, sometimes if you start playing around with this, you'll notice that sometimes you'll make the API request, you'll get the data back, but GPT still won't use the data in its message history to answer your question. So being a bit more explicit in your prompting, especially in your system message, may help you with that. So just these two changes, changing the system message for the initial response, so that'll add it to your message history. And then for the action triggered on function call, we just changed the model to 3.5 turbo. So now we'll reload our page and we'll take some of these other prompts and see different responses. So let's say I happen to know there is one real estate firm in the data. We say, are there any real estate firms trending in the financial news today? And it should pull down all the data and then tell us specifically which ones that are this one here, Realty Income Corporation, and it tells us what's going on. So that's really cool. So if you have a sort of niche in the financial market or something, and then are there any AI companies? This one, I don't know. I'll try this one. And notice I have trending in the news today in all the prompts to sort of, indicate to ChatGPT that that's the function that we want to call. But here, this is good. So one is Upstart Holdings, scheduled to report its Q2 earnings, and so on and so forth. So by playing around with these two different things, the prompts that you're using, as well as the this isn't a prompt, this is the system message. You can get you sort of tailor the behavior of the agent to ChatGPT to what you want it to be. So that about covers this introductory walkthrough of setting up function calling. If you have any questions, please leave them below or any comments. I'm going to be making a couple more videos on slightly more advanced use cases for this function calling behavior or functionality. One will be generating agents. So sort of if you've ever used AutoGPT or Agent GPT, Baby GPT, these different autonomous GPT-based agents that will sort of define an objective and make a bunch of different calls to ChatGPT and do various things. This plugin allows you to do that. So you can trigger different events when a message is done generating to generate another one and keep going and call out to APIs and things. So I'm pretty excited to make a tutorial on that for things that will allow you to interact with external services based on some goal that you've defined. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. And then I'll also be releasing a video that will show you how to use these the parameters. So if you're using a function call that has dynamic arguments based on, say, a query, we'll look at how to set that up. That'll be in the documentation once that's released. That's lagging a bit behind, but it's you can find. I'll have a sample JSON structure that you can plug into your set functions workflow, so that you can see at least how to modify things. But yeah, those two should be coming out soon, so stay tuned. And thanks for watching, and good luck building with the plugin. Thanks.